Hello, everyone. This is Greg Aguilar. I am a listener from the evergreen state of Washington. I serve in the United States Army as a Health Information Systems Manager, and I want to welcome you to today's video episode of the People and Projects podcast.
Hi, I'm Andy Kaufman, host of the People and Projects podcast, and today I'm joined by Dr. Nick Morgan. Nick's been on the podcast twice before, once talking about his book, Trust Me, and also the book Power Cues. And today we're talking about his newest book called Can You Hear Me? With the subtitle, How to Connect with People in a Virtual World. Hey, Nick, thanks for connecting virtually with me today.
Andy, it's a great pleasure. And you picked the best form of virtual communication. Imperfect though it is, we're on video, so well done.
No doubt. I was really hoping something would go wrong, and it may still, just so we can have practices. But I appreciate you joining. You know, I got to tell you, Nick, it's a rare session of my advanced project management class that we don't talk about your book Power Cues when we're talking about dealing with difficult stakeholders, because that, you know, you talk a lot about there's always multiple conversations going on and you have to pay attention, not just what's being said, and all that gets more complicated when we're virtual. So it makes sense that this book was the follow-up. So give it a little more of, like, what would you say is kind of like the big idea behind this new book?
So it's a great question. The big idea really is that when I launched into the research about virtual communications, I was thinking this is a 10-year experiment since it really took off with the mobile phone. Yeah. And it's a massive unregulated social experiment. Virtually half the world has mobile phones. And I heard recently in some parts of the world, the average is 2.4 mobile phones per person. So I don't know quite what that means, but we got a lot of them, and it's really transformed our lives. We're in this half real, half virtual world now, and I just thought it's time to ask, after 10 years, how's that working out?
Right.
And the big takeaway is, I'm sorry to say, it's not working out as well as we thought. The research in some ways is quite alarming. It turns out, for several populations, for example, the more time you spend on mobile phones, the more likely you are to be depressed. And the first cohort they studied was teenage girls, and of course there's been a lot of work on mean girls and bullying and cyber stalking and all this kind of thing, specifically in the teenage population. So maybe that isn't such a surprise that dark things happen on mobile phones. But the other cohort was retired people. And the big promise of the virtual world was you retired folks could sit on that sofa and stay in touch with the grandkids and with your friends and family and whatnot. And it would keep you connected and feeling whole and alive, and it would all be good. And it turns out the opposite. The more time retirees spend in virtual communication, the more likely they are to be depressed. You give them just a few face-to-face encounters with their loved ones, and they cheer right up. It's like magic. So that should tell us something about this social experiment, which is not all good.
No, in fact, I really like how you got in the book of, hey, let's not miss what the problems are. I mean, because you could go straight to the practical fixes, but it is this combination of, hey, this is what we're losing, but this is kind of what we do. I really like how you organize them, because if it's just about the bad, it's like, well, great, but how do we deal with this? And I don't think I would have appreciated the fixes if you wouldn't have had the other side of it. So for the sake of our discussion here today, because I really want people to get the book, because this is the world we live in. But I wanted to pass a couple scenarios by you that I think a lot of people will relate to. Let's say that someone listening to us, or in this case, watching us, they've got some sort of like a weekly conference call. Now, maybe it's just typically over the phone. Maybe they're using some sort of collaborative tool like we're using right now where there's video, but it's on a weekly basis. But the truth is, when they sit back and they think about it, they're like, I think a lot of times people are doing email. I feel like we're missing connection. And so if you want to give us kind of like the first half of the book of like, well, what's going wrong, and the second half of like, well, what do we do about it in this scenario? What comes to mind?
Yeah, absolutely. So the surprising thing about that weekly audio conference is just how bad it is. And when I ask audiences about this, 100% raise their hands when they say, I ask the question, do you regularly interact with the team via some kind of weekly audio conference? 100% of the hands go up. And then I say, okay, time to be honest. What percentage of you, raise your hand if you do something else while you're on the audio conference? And the hands go up a little more slowly, but it's virtually 100%. And I'm just astounded by that. The research, of course, bears it out. Something like 80% and higher of people on those weekly team meetings are doing something else. They're multitasking, and the research shows you don't multitask effectively. So what that means is they're actually paying attention to something else. Mm-hmm. Most of them have the phone call on mute, and they're doing email to try to catch up with their inbox. Some of them are shopping, some of them are exercising, and I did go into the research a little bit just for fun in the book about what are the most shocking things that you do while you should be on an audio conference. And my favorite one was the team, two teams in South America, one of which experienced an earthquake while the audio conference was going on, and the audio conference kept going. Everybody was on mute, so nobody on the other end knew that they had survived an earthquake.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
So that's how bad it can get. And the reason is a bit surprising. It turns out that the audio conference sound systems that we use, so it's typically that little black box in the center of the conference room if you're there in person, or your headset, or worst of all is earbuds, by the way. What those technologies do is they condense the sound. Now that's important because it turns out that a human voice is both the pitch you speak at, but then also a bunch of overtones and undertones that gives Andy's voice his particularly rich and resonant and wonderful qualities that makes everybody want to listen to him on the podcast. And it gives my voice my set of qualities. But more to the point, we can recognize really several hundred voices just without any effort, because that's our unconscious minds analyzing with unbelievable speed those overtones and undertones. And we say, oh, that's my mother, or that's a close friend, or that's a work colleague. And we know without having to do any sort of mental positive, what am I trying to say? Conscious calculation. It just happens, effortless, yeah. And so when you condense that audio band on the kind of sound that comes over an audio conference, then what happens is you cut out the undertones and the overtones as well, but the undertones are particularly important. It turns out those convey the human emotions that we care about. Mm-hmm. What we humans care about is the intent of the other humans. So on that call, we want to know who's excited about the project I'm proposing, who's actually going to get in my way and make life harder, who's with me and willing to work late hours to make it happen. And that kind of level of interest or hostility or enthusiasm is very hard to pick up on the audio conference because the undertones are squeezed, and that's where the emotion is conveyed. And so we literally find audio conferences boring, because you've taken out the human emotion, which is why we go and do other things. And so if you want to get into the fix.
Yeah. Like what are some
fixes
practical things people could do?
Yeah. What can you do about that? So there was some interesting research done at MIT that found that if you measure the amount of input of everybody on the team on this audio call, if it's lopsided, if one or two people do most of the talking, then the team is less likely to be cohesive and productive and get work done. If the contributions of everybody is about equal, roughly equal, then you're more likely to have a cohesive team that's very highly productive. So one goal immediately with an audio conference is to get everybody producing some input, talking. And the only way to make that happen, given the mute situation we described, is to go around the room, the virtual room, and figure out a way, politely and productively to get everybody involved. So you might stop every few minutes and say, all right, let's take the temperature of the room, and then just manually go around to each node or each team member that's on the call and ask them directly how they're reacting. And so that's the first thing to get, is you have to enforce and group input. It won't happen because of the muting phenomenon.
It's almost like you don't drift towards connection there. It's almost like you have to kind of force that interaction to happen.
Yeah. And the second thing I suggest is, for any team that's going to go on any length of time, and trying to, where group cohesion is important, where the productivity matters, then appoint an MC as somebody quite different from the team leader, and get that MC to do the work that would happen automatically if you were all sitting in the same room, which is that kind of face-to-face eye contact, eye rolling, the guy who sneers when you say, hey, we can get that done. I mean, you pick up on all those signals effortlessly in the room, and you know you have to, when you have to react and when you can let it slide. You don't get that on the audio conference. So you need an MC who's going to check in with people and notice when somebody hasn't participated for a while, and do that kind of group housekeeping that just keeps everybody involved, and stops the flow regularly to say, all right, let's recap here. What have we said? What are we proposing? How does everybody feel about that? You have to do that manually, and at first it may seem a little sort of out of the ordinary or strange or something awkward, but you have to do it because it's not going to happen automatically.
Yeah, that's good. What about if you're using interface like you and I are, the camera versus the not camera? You and I had some interactions on LinkedIn with somebody that's like, man, it's not natural having this 2D image. And so is it good or bad, or weaknesses if somebody wanted to start doing that for this weekly meeting?
Yeah, basically video conferencing is better than just an audio conference, which is better than email or text message, any of the text-based forms of communication. And it's a hierarchy, all leading up to face-to-face, which is by far the best. The thing to understand about video conferencing is it's not as good as we think it is. And the reasons for that, again, are surprising. So you have to think about the human brain as this anticipation machine, this prediction machine. Its job is to keep you alive. So it's constantly operating a couple of seconds or a couple of minutes into the future, looking for danger. And it's looking for danger through the 5 senses that we all know about and are familiar with, plus a 6th one that's a bit surprising. It's called proprioception. And what it does is, it's our unconscious mind keeping track of where we are in space. So I know I'm here, you know you're there. When we go into a room with a half a dozen people in it, then our brains kick into high gear, and we keep track of not only where we are, but where everybody else is as well. And we do that for obvious survival reasons. We want to know where the friends and the foes are. And so the brain works quite hard doing that. Now, what happens when I see you on a 2-dimensional screen, my poor brain can't figure out how far away that you are, because I can't relate 2 dimensions to the 3 that I'm used to polling to figure out where you are in space. So I can't locate you in space, and I become, or my unconscious mind becomes like one of those little whirly computer things when the computer's trying to figure something out and can't get it done. And so my brain just goes into overdrive, and as a result, we find video conferencing stressful and anxiety producing. Because that brain is reaching out, is sending out a signal, sending out a ping, and not getting an answer back. So that's the first thing to understand about that. We find that 2 dimensions just plain puzzling, at least our unconscious minds do. And so you can help that, again, jumping to solutions, you can help that by putting clues in. So I think about this consciously now. The first thing I did when you signed on was I looked behind you, and I saw the bookcase, and I saw the books over there on your right-hand side. And so that enabled me to kind of calibrate where you are in space and how close you are to me. And so I do that consciously to try to help my unconscious mind just relax a little bit and say, it's all right, you can figure out where Andy is.
Yeah.
And so you can help your video conferees by putting clues like that into the picture behind you. And so you want something at the back wall, which they can easily determine the size of, and then it's good to have something in sort of 3/4 position, and then something close to you. And I used to have a plant here, but the plant died, so apologies for that. I would have had a plant here. You could tell how far away I was. I got to get a new plant. So yeah, so you can do those kind of things to help a little bit on the video conferencing. But the other important clue is just to keep taking breaks, because the mind needs to recover from that sense of overwork and lack of information.
Ever been part of one of those? It's called telepresence today. Who knows what it'll be called in the future? But it's like a big screen, almost like a half circle on this side, half circle on that side. I got to tell you, the first time, Nick, I was in one of those, I almost thought for sure, like maybe not 5 minutes into it, but 15 minutes into it, like they were there. Like it's almost like the brain started thinking, and maybe it's something about the fact that the space there was similar to our space here. I'd never really thought about what to have in the back like that, but that's a potential thing for us to consider when we do this. And I have found, I don't know what you think about this, just anecdotally, that if I have a meeting with like 15 people, if all the cameras are on, at some point it does get a little bit difficult and distracting. But if maybe the current person speaking is on and then it goes back and forth, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. I have only come down to the fact that when I'm teaching a webinar, it seems like it goes better if my camera's on. But any thoughts on all cameras on or not?
Yeah, it's too much information. What we actually do when we're on a video conference, and this is very hard to combat, is we spend, and there's research on this, they tracked eye movements of people on video cameras. And what we actually do is we spend a lot of time looking at our own PIP, the picture in a picture. and yeah, and it's because it's irresistible. We want to see how we look and sort of keep track of ourselves. But that is the unconscious purpose of that. Again, it's our brain keeping track of where we are in space and being a little puzzled by the fact that, hey, we're showing up there in a two-dimensional picture. Where am I? The brain is saying. But think about how odd that actually is. If you were sitting in a conference room, it would be like you were holding a little mirror down here and sort of looking at the mirror all the time instead of looking at the people around you. That would just be bizarre. And it's bad enough that people look at their mobile phones while they're in meetings, and that's a bad behavior that's developed because of the virtual world. But imagine looking at a little mirror. So that shows you just how distracting it is. That's the other part of video conferencing.
Yeah,
that's tiring. And so I think the fewer distractions you have, the better. There's a nice startup company near me called Owl Labs, and they've produced a very cute little video camera that is good for those kind of conference room situations. And it's a thing that does have little eyes and eyebrows, and it looks kind of like an owl, maybe a technological owl. But they set that in the middle, and what it does is it rotates around, so it naturally swings its attention to the people who are speaking. And that turns out to be an improvement over a static camera, because it does model a little bit what you do when somebody talks in a face-to-face meeting. Naturally, you turn toward them and to see what they're saying, and so that feels a little more natural. It reduces the stress a little bit. But you referenced the telepresence rooms or the virtually there rooms, and those are getting better and better, and they still have the same problem of the difference between 2 dimensions and 3 dimensions. But it's an effort to try to trick the brain into thinking that it's looking at 3 dimensions, but it doesn't really. The same kind of efforts are required. But I do see that as an improvement, because for the simple reason that the layout of the room often gives you at least an illusion of where those people are. In other words, you see a table that's represented on the other side of the room, wherever it is, and chairs, and then people sitting in those chairs. So it gives you a little more sense of depth, which is what the brain is craving. And so that does help. So I think we'll eventually get there. The technology will get better and better, but it's still got a long way to go.
Yeah, that makes sense. One more scenario. A lot of people realize face-to-face is great, but the truth is, from a staffing strategy, we want to be able to have that person who lives in a different state without having to get them to move. We want to get access to the talent wherever the talent is, so we have people in distributed teams. let's say the person listening to us works from home, or they have somebody on their team that works from home, whether it's in how we do meetings or not, just generally speaking, how can we get more connection when we have people that are not co-located with us on a regular basis?
Yeah, so let's just put it out there first. That is, from the standpoint of employee engagement and morale and productivity, is a terrible situation, and yet it's the reality. And so your question is exactly right. We have to do things consciously to overcome that situation. We can't just sort of assume people are going to cope with it. The worst possible scenario, it turns out, is the meeting where you've got a few people who are in the office and therefore they're all sitting around a room talking to each other, and then there are 2 or 3 people just on the phone. So they're represented by the black box in the middle of the conference table. That's the worst, because you set up this hierarchy of relevance, in effect, for the unconscious minds of the people who are in the space face to face. The folks on the audio don't exist, and so they start to feel left out just because of the way the folks talk in the space. They can handle the conversational flow effortlessly, whereas the people on the audio conferencing have to jump in some awkward way, and we all know how that goes. They cut in right in the wrong place, and then they say sorry, and they pause, and no, you finish, no, you go ahead, and you have these sort of idiotic exchanges where you apologize to each other for 30 seconds, and then it finally gets going. And so that's very hard on those people, and they tend to do one of two things. They either don't contribute at all, which of course isn't helpful, or they contribute too much. They feel like in order to be relevant, they have to comment after every single point that's brought up. And we've all had that experience where you got somebody on the other end just droning on while everybody here in the room is rolling their eyes and thinking, am I going to live through this? So so it's not a good situation. The way you need to do it is you need to make it better, is to set a very careful agenda where you're turning over who's running the meeting on a regular basis to the people who are in the room and the people who are on audio, who are not visibly present, and allow those people to run the meeting. And I particularly like, and this of course won't work in every setting, but in many settings, especially like in an IT situation, you've got an opportunity for each member of the team to introduce some new bit of software or a concept or an idea, in effect, to do a little mini teaching during the course of the meeting. And so you don't have to do that every single time, but if you pass that around, and especially again to the people who aren't there, then that gives them a sense of ownership and brings them in to the meeting. So that can be a very helpful way to increase the sense of participation. Again, you have to have an MC, make sure that those people get appropriate chances to speak, but to the point about the droner, not too much. And so those are a couple of things you can do to make it better. It's not going to be an ideal situation. The third one that I like, and perhaps my favorite, is to get everybody to take little 30-second videos on their mobile phones of their own setting, what they're doing. So if you're at home, get out of your pajamas, put on your work casual clothes, right, and show them what you're having for lunch, or just take a tour of your office, or say, here's the place where I'm so productive and turning out all this great work. And if people pass those in and share them, then that can be a very nice way to make people feel engaged. That works particularly well when you've got different cultures represented. And that's very much the norm these days. When I ask audiences, again, they'll say, yeah, we've got a team in India, we've got a team in California, and we've got a team in New York. And this is a way of bridging those cultural differences and showing people sort of what's the local food, what's the local conditions, and that can be a really fun and interactive way to bring the team together. You need to do that kind of conscious effort, though. Don't just let it happen as if we were still communicating the same way, all sitting around a conference room table face to face, because it's a very different experience and people rapidly get alienated.
Yeah, man, that's good, Nick. That's good. I think it's clear, like you said, I mean, not ideal, but this is the world we live in. You end the book by kind of talking about, well, what's the future look like too? So tell us why are the stakes so big? Not even just today, but for the future as well.
Well, I think the one of the unintended consequences of this experiment that we've seen is just the rise in alienation. It's measured by that famous Gallup study that gets done every year or two, where they measure employee engagement, and it's now become the employee disengagement study because the numbers are shocking. It's in America, it's about 2/3 of employees are disengaged from their work, and that's gone straight up as the amount of remote working has gone up. And worldwide, it's over 80%, so it's even worse in other countries. So the stakes in terms of this unregulated social experiment, as I said at the beginning, are very, very high. It really is our humanity at stake. And of course, the workplace is one huge part of it, but also our connection with family and friends, and our social ties as human beings. And it just turns out that we are not hardwired to communicate well in the virtual space. We find it a situation of lack, of loss, of emptiness. And so we get addicted to Facebook, say, because you get the likes, and each one of those is like a tiny little endorphin hit. It's like a quarter teaspoon of sugar. So it's not enough to satisfy you, but it's enough to make you want a little bit more. And so we spend more and more time on that. And as I said, one of my chapter titles is "I'm more connected than ever. Why do I feel so alone?" That's the result. And the long-term effects of this are not encouraging. So we need to do two things. We need to improve the technology. Bring me holograms, because then at least my brain will know where the other person is, or I'll think I know where the other person is. Holograms are better than two-dimensional screens. And also, we need to learn a new language of being clear about our intent and telling each other how we're feeling in ways that we haven't been comfortable with before, because we've let the body language, the second conversation, do the talking. And we can't afford that, because it's not doing it effectively now. And the more we live in the virtual world, as you said, it's so efficient. The advantages in terms of the economy of travel and time and that kind of thing are so huge, they're not going away. We are stuck with it. And the technology will improve, but only slowly. So we simply have to get better at the communication piece. And that means, I say, starting with the basic question, ask yourself, when you're in a virtual communication, ask yourself, how did what I just say make the other person feel? And if you don't know the answer to that, then ask them out loud. And it may seem awkward at first until you get the hang of it. But if you don't know the answer to that question, then you might as well not have had that communication, because what we ultimately care about is human intent. How are we affecting each other? What are you thinking about what I'm saying? How am I feeling about how this conversation went? So I need to know the answer to that question. And the good thing about asking it out loud is I show you the respect to say that I care, and I'm giving you the time to do it. And in this time-deprived, information-overloaded world, that's a huge thing. So we've got to get better at this.
Yeah, I like that. For those listening and watching, you're probably in these sort of situations now, and if you're not, you're going to be. So if this sounds intriguing at all, I recommend you get a copy of Nick's new book, Can You Hear Me? It's available now through Harvard Business Review Press. Highly recommend. Nick, thank you for joining us on the People and Projects podcast.
Andy, thank you so much. Great to see you again.
That is a wrap, man. Yeah,
How was that? Was that what you wanted?
Oh yeah, that was great. It's just,
okay. I was trying to keep my answers a little bit shorter, but
no.
I get carried away.
Yeah, I'm not worried about that at all. It's all really good value. It's just one of those things of, you're exactly right. Like, how do we make it better? And you actually had some of that about virtual reality near the end of the book, about maybe, I don't know, maybe next time you and I've got a headset on.
Yeah, we're standing in each other's offices or something.
Hey, don't get so close to me. Well, I'm not. Yeah. I'm in Boston.
Yeah. The research it's very early days on that kind of augmented reality, but the research is very promising. That seems to be something that may be the ultimate answer is some kind of it's basically a mix of the two, some face-to-face and a greater sense of through those crazy looking headsets.
Well, in fact, I'm trying to remember.
you're
One second.
actually there. You got one?
Just noticed we'd gotten some things for our little ones, and it's one of those crazy headsets, you know. So
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
And you put your mobile phone in there, and the truth is, it probably made me more nauseated than a roller coaster, but the technology will get better. So maybe this is the future of meetings right here. Who knows?
That's a very typical first reaction, which is interesting. It's a problem we're going to have to overcome. But the question, the wrong question has been asked about that. What they're trying to do is figure out, so, okay, people get nauseous. Do they get over it? How can we make it better? But the real question they should be asking is, so why are people getting nauseous? If it looks more real, why does that make you nauseous?
Right.
And we don't really know the answer to that yet. So that's an important question to solve, it seems to be. Like, if reality is good, why does virtual reality make me want to throw it?
Right.
What's going on there?
Yeah, one guy told me it's frame rate, that we need faster frame rate on the mobile phone. So I don't know.
Yeah,
but regardless,
that may be one of the things. Yeah.
Well, Nick, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'll let you know when it goes live. And
awesome.
I appreciate your friendship, appreciate your support, and anything I can do to help get the word out ever. It's my pleasure. So
thank you, sir. Great pleasure to see you again.
Thanks, man.
Cheers.
Yeah.